Hello and welcome to the Slime Files, where we look at some of my past tech, no matter how complete or useful it might be. Today we've got something that is fairly complete, but questionably useful. It is a nether tree farm that collects a 3x3 area. Um, yeah, and so this actually means that it's able to collect every possible stem block that generates, except for the one that would try to generate where the dispenser is. Kind of inevitable that you can't harvest that one. Um, and the idea here is, it would make it faster. The reality is it's actually a lot slower than even the most basic of nether tree farms. And like it is more bone meal efficient, but that's kind of pointless when it's this much larger than a moss farm. Now, while it might not be a very good stem farm, it is good at farming the other blocks, especially shroomlight, which it can get up to 150 of per hour, and it can get up to 10 times as much in the war blocks. Of course, it took a few tries before I got to this design, so let's actually go ahead and travel back to where this all started. So here we are on my generic creative world on my Switch, which is unfortunately where a pretty large amount of my stuff can be found. The first step was to actually figure out what blocks would get filled in. When I was first starting to make this, there was a certain mechanic in the game where nether trees, when they would grow, they could replace a large variety of different blocks, including redstone dust, but also, importantly, pistons, but not honey and slime blocks, thankfully. So in order to be able to push it around, you have to like reach in using a sticky structure. Of course, I like just checked the other day, and turns out that is apparently just no longer a thing, I guess. So that's cool. So that means all these farms just use a very large amount of blocks for nothing, unless if that's a bug, which I wouldn't be surprised about. So the main idea was that we would have these double extenders on the side, and then a triple extender through the middle column. Uh, so like we could pull these two sides back, push that all the way through, and then push this in, push it all the way through, and repeat. Now, I'm not quite the best when it comes to actually wiring these things up, like clearly. But the thing is, we actually have to have it be a little extra complicated because once we push it through, we still need to get it into like a line. And that can take, a bit of time just because, you have to push all the way, all of the blocks through. So every time we push a block through, we have to wait before we can push again. So that's why we ended up with really complicated redstone back here. So this part right here, I believe, controls the side pistons mainly. Um, and also just when has it finished harvesting. And then this one is for like doing the triple extension. Also, just my wonderful planning skills ended up going right through my test from before, so that's also great. Yeah, so the redstone is just a complete mess back here. Uh, and then the redstone underneath for growing the tree is really not much better. And I'm not really going to go into it, partly because I don't even want to try to remember how this stuff works. Anyways, so once we do have our wall of blocks, we do need to turn it into like a string of blocks. And so I use this kind of little piston conveyor thing that just pushes them through one by one. Once a piston extends, it powers the next one. Uh, and then you just have to have this piston running. And then once it reaches the bottom, it'll reset the thing. And then also let the redstone back here know that it can do the next push. And we can actually see it running if we wanted to. Uh, yeah, also just shout outs to the Switch being quite laggy. Alright, so we got a tree. So, oh man. So it pulled off the sides and now it's pushing through, and it has to wait a bit while it... Oh wow, this is just so laggy. So I forgot that that has to be running apparently. Yeah, as you can see, the Switch does not like this very much, and it's taking a very long time to load up places. But yeah, and then it starts growing another tree. We're gonna stop that because I really don't want it to actually harvest another one. To summarize what kind of problems this design has, well, first off, it's on the Switch, so it's really laggy. Anyways, the part that does the tree growing is just a complete mess. Like, we have to move extra blocks around just to prevent them from sticking, and just like, it's overall a mess. The part that controls the collection is extremely a mess. That, yeah, is it's just complete disaster waiting to be built wrong. But then also, if even a single block gets pushed through, it has to wait for the entire conveyor to finish, which can take quite a while. Yeah, overall, really problematic. Oh, and then of course it's also limited to just 12 blocks tall. Anyways, let's move on to the next attempt. So here we are on the download of my old creative server, which I ran mainly because trying to do redstone on the Switch was really difficult, and for some reason I was really adamant about continuing to do it on the Switch. It's not great. So here is the new and improved tree grower, which is just so much more compact and also leaves this side entirely open, which I take advantage of later. Uh, And essentially, it entirely runs on latches instead of a clock, which I find just makes things a lot smoother. So we have this signal coming in that tells it to not run by just holding this piston extended. And then if we do that, you'll see that it goes into the bone mealing mode. But then we have this timer so that after a short time, it's allowed to go back. But the other important thing here is it will only be pushed back if there is bone meal in this dispenser, or rather full bone meal. So you'll see that this torch never comes on until that, you know, doesn't have bone meal, meaning that bone meal had been used up. And there we go. That grows the tree and detects if it's been grown. One of the most important things that I wanted to change was, of course, the control system for actually harvesting it. And so I just replaced the whole thing with a feed tape telling it how to control a bunch of flip-flops. Of course, we also need it to be able to wait at times. And the way I did that was by simply having it where blocks that do cut off redstone will make it so that it waits, until this torch turns on. Well, it turns out that if we try to do it this way, we can only we can only change one thing every 12 game ticks. So we especially get like a really slow triple retraction. But it was then that I realized that we can actually do this using fewer signals. So here we have an actual cross-section of it. The idea here is we can actually harvest it a little smarter. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull these parts back, but only the back two blocks. And now, instead of doing a triple extension, we're just going to do a double extension and retraction. Now, we go ahead and push this block in, and push this, which also is going to activate this front line, but as you'll see later, that's actually okay if we do it now. Then, of course, we do the double extension. Oh, right, this one. And now, we go ahead and push this one in, same as before, but now, here is where we finally do the triple extension. So, boom, boom. And now, we just simply have to push this final one 3 times, and the side ones get pushed in as we do that. And then finally, we just simply have to power off the front parts. Though as it turns out, we can actually control the front part with just a single line, because if this part's pulled back and we turn that on, I mean, this part's going to try to push forward, which is fine anyways, but, this part won't double extend until after the first piston has extended. And with that, we're able to collect it in a slightly smarter way, which also just means we end up moving blocks around a lot less, which is pretty nice. So now that we've gotten those parts out of the way, let's look at how we actually spaghettify our wall. And we essentially use this little style of thing all throughout the whole thing, which is where, it's basically just a smart piston where, you just uh, observer into piston, um, like that. However, uh, it's smarter, you could say, because it actually does it by setting a latch that will then get reset once the block gets pushed. And so that way, it's able to wait until it's able to push and still be tiled every one block. So we're able to then use that same elbow stuff to then send it off into different directions, and mainly in groups of 3, where we do this 3-way merge, which also uses those same elbows. When the sides push, first off, we push it with this slime structure to make it so that it can only push forward one block. So if we do that, you'll notice that it is completely stuck because it's trying to push too many blocks. Once we do that, it works. And then once it pushes, it also sets the middle. Like that. And so with that, it's able to do a 3-way merge. And all of this is done using just kind of these SR latches, and it always waits for it to become available, if that makes sense. From there, it's pretty much just a matter of merging all these single lines together, and I just kind of winged it. Now, there's one small problem with this design, and this is a lot of the timing. Like, it's actually a pretty slow loop here, from read the thing to toggle flip-flop to move pistons to detect it to send the signal back around to tell it whether or not it can move. So in this design, I tried to push the timings as close as possible, and I thought that maybe just by having it wait constantly that would work. No, it doesn't, not even close. So the reality is this should be a little slower than it actually is. And with that, let's finally go back to the world that we were in before and look at the final design. So here we are on the final design, which there will be a world download of. That's why it's in its own separate world. And there were a couple final improvements. First off, I made a more elegant solution for collecting all the individual block streams together in a way that can be tiled infinitely. The other main improvement was, of course, making it so that this instruction loop actually can have instructions like really quickly. The first thing was, let's use a faster flip-flop. We just use hoppers just so the flip-flops respond faster, though they can't toggle as quickly, but that doesn't matter. And then we also have this almost expedited signal that just makes a pulse. And this also cuts out on a lot of instructions, which is really nice. And it actually is all the way to the point where this signal arrives one tick before it even needs to. And then I also switched to using a clock. I don't like using clocks because I find that they make things more problematic often, but in this case it actually does make it easier. And if we then go ahead and have it run, so I'm running this for the first time in 1.20, and it appears that they changed something with how the dispensers work, but I think I fixed it. Anyways, we can now go ahead and watch this. As you can see, it's nice and fast. Yeah. And now here we do that triple push at the end, and yeah, there we go. So I said that previously that this whole area, which, I mean, previously there was nothing over here, yeah, that I did a little something with it, and that was add a block switcher. And I actually did this in the previous design, but I used a flip-flop and anyways, this version just uses a lever and it uses some just more gates and latches and stuff to make sure that it always switches over properly. One other little detail that I included is just to make sure it also, if it is low on bone meal, it will turn off the farm and also turn on a little lamp. The other lamp just tells you that it is harvesting, so you shouldn't leave. Uh, and then you just turn the switch off to run it. So I think that about wraps things up. I mean, there's still some improvements that could probably be made. Like, you could probably get these pistons a lot closer now that they don't get replaced. I don't really plan on doing that though, sadly. Uh, and then also just collecting the blocks together. I mean, I'll admit this is not a very nice to build solution. Well, anyways, there's still a few other things that I could have gone over, but I think that about wraps it up for today. Uh, World download will be in the description. Uh, Once again, this farm is only really useful for uh, Shroomlight and Netherwart, so yeah. I mean, if people really like this farm a lot, I might make a tutorial. We'll have to see though.
Thank you for making it to the end of the video. YouTube Analytics tells me that only 7.8% of the first million natural numbers are actually prime. So let's see if we can change that. If it's not too much to ask, I would also love it if you were to subscribe the 2 in H2O. And until next time,